Welcome back to Mortgages Made Easy. We have James Hollingsworth from Laurus Law here today with us. We're going to be talking through all the exciting world of property law and all the things that buyers and sellers need to know when navigating the complicated space of property and law. So thank you for joining us, James. Welcome.
Thank
nice
you for
to have
having
you
me.
here.
Thank
No
you.
worries.
My name's James Hollingsworth. I'm the Chief Executive at Laurus Law, and my journey to getting here was from initially doing a law degree at university. I did my legal practice course, and the route for me at that point in time was corporate law. That was, that's where the money was. And I didn't really know actually that much about that world until I started to do some work experience within a couple of larger sort of magic circle firms. At that point, I actually quite quickly realised that it wasn't really a world I felt I belonged in. I have absolute respect for people that operate in those firms, but for me, I wanted to be involved in something that was a bit more personal. When I'd finished my legal practice course, I went into a commodity trading firm. So I didn't go straight into law, and I was an account manager dealing with base and precious metals and the trading of those for investments. And I spent about 3 years doing that. And my clients at the time, without exception, were all private investors, and they had these large investment portfolios within property, London property primarily. Some were accidental landlords who had sort of bought and then not sold but remortgaged and taken money out to buy another property and so on, and sort of moved up the ladder that way. Others were more deliberate and had been successful building buy-to-let portfolios and doing development work. So that sort of piqued my interest in property itself as an asset that was tangible. It was an interesting asset class and could be used to make profit, but also something that provided a roof over your head.
Yeah.
So following a few years in that, I really sort of asked myself how I could get involved in property more directly. And the answer to that was estate agency. So I...
the typical route that most people
exactly.
anything to do off agency is start an agency and then sort of work your way out from there, really. Exactly.
I think I would say it has a relatively low barrier to entry, but it's an incredibly hard job, and it taught me an awful lot. I spent 3 years in estate agency learning the principles of sales, customer service, and really hard work, pretty much 7 days a week, and not really switching off. But it also introduced me to all sorts of different people from all walks of life. And
do you feel like starting at that sort of level, doing that for, I mean, 3 years is a decent amount of time. It's not like you did it for 6 months, but do you feel like that sort of gave you a really good sort of base to know sort of not all the ins and outs of the next step that you took, which was into law, but do you feel like that sort of really sort of set you up and it sort of gave you the real oversight to know, right, now I know what I'm doing, now I know sort of most of it, it really sort of put you sort of ahead?
I think it's hard to describe just how broad the skill set is that you learn from estate agency, because actually, as I say, you're talking to individuals from all different walks of life. Yeah. You're in a pressured environment. It's eat what you kill, more or less. So there's a lot on the line. And what I found personally was that I spent a lot of time getting to know my clients, buyers, sellers, and the sorts of emotional aspects of what was driving their decisions. I got to know the market quite quickly because I was viewing a lot of property. So you get a quick feel for what something might be worth and what someone might be prepared to pay for it, depending on the market conditions at the time.
Yeah.
I also saw two very different markets in the pre-credit crunch era from 2005 up to 2006, 2007, and then 2008, obviously, where the world changed and mortgages were very difficult to get. The property market stalled overnight pretty much, and that created stresses and strains for sellers at the time. So I learned a lot, in all aspects, really. And you needed to be in tune with what was happening in the market, because ultimately that was driving decision making, that was driving pricing. So I think it gave a good grounding for that. And the other thing that I found really interesting was actually managing the deal through to successful exchange and completion.
Yeah.
So rather than just stitching the deal together and getting a willing buyer and seller, it was also then about, okay, well, how do we get this through?
Yeah. I mean, getting the offer agreed is almost that's the easy bit. And that's such a small, in terms of you look at the scale of how long something takes, getting it agreed is such a small side of it.
Yeah.
But the back end is where so much more work goes in. So how did you did you just sort of throw yourself in at agency level and getting to know that side some more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helped having an interest in it in the first place, but also having the legal background.
Yeah.
I'd done, although conveyancing wasn't my focus when I was at law school, I had to train and get a basic understanding of it. And I found that actually communicating with the lawyers and keeping the flow of communication between the relevant parties, not just lawyers, buyer, seller, surveyor, mortgage broker. Often there were, family members related to the buyers or sellers that were involved. And so that whole sort of project management side of things I found of real interest in, and it really helped to have some background in law to be able to do that. But I also realised that as a salesperson, I was really leaving everything to chance and losing control of my deal once it went into the hands of lawyers if I didn't follow up and continue that process through to exchange, because it's quite a long period of time. And obviously I saw two markets, pre credit crunch, it was a lot easier to get deals through. After that point, the world changed and things became far more complicated. Lawyers were far more risk averse, buyers were far more risk averse, and there's a lot of money on the line. So I found that it was even more important at that point to stay involved. And that's the sort of principles that led me into eventually becoming a lawyer again and actually being hands-on managing that process from the legal point of view.
So where did you go from? So obviously you did the agency thing, did 3 years there. Where was your then next step? Was it straight to Laurus or was it somewhere in between?
No, it was to another firm. So it was a central London firm that I knew one guy that did some property work. One of the things I struggled with as an agent was finding a lawyer that I could trust consistently to deliver on the deals that I handed to them. And it still exists today. Good lawyers will sometimes become a victim of their own success. They become very busy, and then naturally service levels can drop, and that's a problem. And this was back in a day when not all lawyers were using email, so it was fairly antiquated.
Do you still find some of that today?
It's come a long way since then. Everyone's on email. But there is still an issue with the fragmentation of the legal market. There's lots of firms that operate differently. Some are far more efficient than others in terms of the way they set up technologically, but you still have different models of some firms operating with very large caseloads and sort of teams of people working in a production line and others working in a more bespoke fashion. And so trying to manage the process between those two different styles in the same way as agency, where you'll have sort of your online agents who don't tend to get involved in deal progression at all, and London agents in particular who tend to be more focused on sort of hand-holding the process through to exchange.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So then from there, how long did you stay at that firm for? And then
so I was 8 or 9 years at that firm. The guy I trained with, so I went back in there. I sort of gave myself to the firm to get a training contract, and spent a couple of years training up. Part of that process was for me to try and win work for the business at the same time, using my agency contacts, of which I'd had quite a few. And that was relatively successful, to the point where we'd built a team. I started to build a team there and took over the running of that team.
Yeah.
8 years on, it was time for me to start afresh, because I felt that there was an opportunity in the market for a firm that was very focused on individuals in the sort of high pressure point areas of their lives. So moving house, which is commonly known as being extremely stressful. We also focus on family law, divorce and children work, and private clients, so wills, trust, probate. So the real kind of emotive areas. And I think sometimes some law firms can miss the fact that they are hugely emotive areas that they're working in. So
do you find, I mean, obviously doing property law, obviously, I can only imagine it's a very complicated process, but I mean, half the time, do you find yourself being more of like almost more like a therapist, and actually just sort of trying to calm people down and talk them through? And because, the emotional side of all the areas of the business that you cover, I can imagine the emotions are just running wild all the time. So do you find that a lot of what you do, or a lot of what some of your lawyers, is more just sort of the therapy kind of side, and more sort of the actual being an actual lawyer?
Yeah, there's a balance to strike, no question. But I think you can't be a good lawyer in this area without having both. You have to have empathy. You have to be able to actively listen to your clients, and you have to accept that they are under stress, and you need to be able to deliver a service and explain sometimes complicated technical points of law to them in a way that they're going to understand, even though they're under stress or in a position where things need to happen urgently. And that's across all the aspects of what we do, not just in property, but also in the family and private client side. And I'm sure it's the same in mortgage.
Yeah, I mean, probably it's, I mean, there's only one side of it. It's just, this is what I want. Can you do it for me? And then it's obviously the emotional side. Once you get it, it's then trying to deal, and it's a balancing act of, there's only so much more that once we've got the offer out, it's then sort of effectively it's over to you guys and saying, well, now it's down to it. But obviously I'm here if anything goes wrong. Because, as I said in the previous episodes that I've done, is that my background was estate agency for 10, 12 years before I then made the jump to mortgages. So I, similarly to you, I understand that side of it first. So I understand the whole process from start to finish. So yeah, it's very similar. You can't just be a robot and say, this is what it is, deal with it. Because people need, especially if you're a first time buyer that's never done it before, it's a really daunting sort of area to sort of move into. And if you don't have the right people sort of helping you and guiding you through and giving you the right advice, it can be really, really stressful and really, really scary. So yeah, I mean, it's similar. You have to sort of have that empathy, just to be able to help them out, because it is really stressful.
Exactly. And I think leadership as well, in many ways. There's a lot of noise around property. Everyone has an opinion about what's happening in the market, when it's a good time to buy or a bad time to buy, what something's worth. And I found that explaining to a client what's important at the right time, keeping the levels of communication open, and showing an understanding of what they're going through, because for them it is the most important thing that's happening in their life right now, and they will be listening to other people, or at least seeing things or hearing things that affect their decision making. So if the lawyer, broker, mortgage broker, estate agent, surveyor, or whoever else is involved in the deal can communicate openly, then it can take, and honestly, exactly, then it can take a lot of the stress out of the process. And I think personally the process is too stressful, or there's stress that quite often is the result of or creates an issue in terms of deals going through. So the fall through rate is higher than it should be. The time that deals take is too long. And so some of what we can do to help address that is by open communication between the different parties.
You spoke before about obviously the relationship between the agent and the solicitor, and how important that is, and obviously referral business goes a very, very long way. What would you say is some of the sort of the best advice that you would give to lawyers in that position who are looking to try and establish some of those relationships with good agents that they've worked with, but also for agents that you can sort of advise them and say, you know, what's some advice that you would give to sort of both sides about how important it is to have a really good sort of lawyer in your back pocket. So if you've got not just a tricky situation, even if it's, I've got a really lovely first-time buyer that I want to refer to you, can you look after them? Is there any advice that you can give to solicitors and to agents on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes down to communication more than anything.
Yeah.
As an agent, I found this that it was really important to me to try and keep control of my deal, to have open communication between the parties. So if you're a lawyer trying to establish a relationship with an estate agent, when you get a memorandum of sale, for example, to call the agent and say thank you and to introduce yourself. As an agent, I would always do that to the lawyer. I don't see that happening very often, but if you're proactive enough to make the call to the agent and say thank you, I look forward to working with you on this transaction. If you have specific sensitivities around when is a good time to be in contact or not, because of course lawyers need time to go away and read the legal papers and prepare reports and report to their clients and so on. So there are time stresses there. But I think if you can establish some trust with an agent so they understand what you're doing and when you're doing it, and you're grateful for the interaction, because I as a lawyer I always found that agents will do anything they can to try and help you get a deal through. They'll ferry documents around, they'll chase things up, you know, they have direct contact with both sides, and a good agent can really be the difference between a deal going through or not. So just engagement with that process, I think is a real benefit. And if you're a lawyer that engages with that process and is proactive in communicating, then I think you'll win the trust of agents quite quickly.
Perfect. Cool. What do most people sort of get wrong about solicitors on a daily basis? Only in the property world. Only in the property world. But what's...
Yeah, well, with humans, with feelings.
Really?
Yeah, genuinely. I think there is a sense that lawyers create problems and aren't that interested if a deal goes through or not. There's a common misconception amongst agents in particular that, well, if you're a lawyer, you get paid regardless of whether it goes through or not. In instances where you might charge a fee for some of the work that you do, you rarely get paid for the full extent of your time if a deal goes through. And I think there are pressures on lawyers that are perhaps misunderstood by agents, but I think that misunderstanding comes through poor communication or a lack of it, an absence of it, and everyone will fill a void. So agents do have a habit sometimes, lawyers have a habit sometimes of going dark when they don't know the answer to something. So they would rather do the work or find out the answer before they communicate. It's been described as the sort of black hole of communication. So the call comes in or the email comes in the morning. You don't want to get back to it until later that day because you don't have a full answer. And as a lawyer, you want to have a full answer. But of course, that period of several hours or so on, and particularly if you don't get back to it to the next day, that can feel like a lifetime for the person who's under pressure, whether that's an agent or a client. And so I think as lawyers, we could be better at sometimes managing expectations around the fact that you are working on it, or just to say, I'll come back to you within a certain time frame. But I think most lawyers care passionately about what they do and getting things right. And it's a busy workload. So I think some empathy on both sides can really help.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So obviously you've been doing this for a very long time now. What was the moment that you realised I'm actually really, really good at what I'm doing in terms of the advice that I'm giving to my clients and helping out and managing teams? Was there a light bulb moment that went off for you? Was it just you just felt naturally that every day you just grew in confidence and you just got better and better and better?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask. I've always been proud of looking after people and getting good feedback. I want people to be happy, whether they're my colleagues or my clients. And I obviously learnt the principles of client service probably at an early age through bar work and other things when I was much younger, and then into agency, which was all about service, and then into the legal profession. So you get quick feedback from clients. You know when they're happy and you know when they're not. And I think being able to manage people under stress, which most people going through a property transaction are at some point, and also responding to things when they don't go well. So if there's a delay, or if there's something that affects the timing of a transaction, or whether something can happen or not, or sometimes delivering bad news. Sometimes we find something that is a problem and it will affect someone's decision to buy or sell. Being able to manage that is a really important skill, and so you get a lot of feedback quickly. So I wouldn't say there's been a light bulb moment to say now I'm good at this, but your confidence definitely builds over time. But it's quite quick because you're getting feedback along the way.
Fair enough. So the whole sort of conveyancing process, if you could redesign it from scratch, you could go, right, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to do this a different way. What would stay, what would go as part of the process that you're doing now? Is there anything that feels particularly archaic that you'd want to sort of drag into sort of because you've got all the sort of technologies we've got going on now? Is there anything in particular that stands out that you'd go, I'd change that in an instant?
I think the way the world is going in terms of data, you can make a decision on where something is at much more quickly if you've got all the information at your fingertips up front. And I think we're heading that way. There are other challenges that are thrown into the mix, new legislation. We've got the Building Safety Act that's come in recently. Obviously, we've got rent reform. There's all sorts that are going on that will keep us on our toes in that sense. And verifying people's source of funds is another huge part of the job that's come in recent years to add to the mix. But in terms of looking at the legal title and the issues that might affect a property and someone's buying decision, if you could get hold of all that information up front, as you would if you were buying at auction, for example, with a prepared legal pack. If you had that for every property, then that would enable you to make a reasonable assessment and report to your client far sooner than the current process, which tends to sort of drip feed information over a period of time.
Is that something that's actually possible to do though in today's? I think so. Age?
It's partly dependent because of the way we rely on sellers' replies to inquiries and the upfront information that they're asked to give. Part of it is to do with sellers' sort of readiness to do that, or their willingness to do it. And what we've encouraged agents over time is to get their clients or encourage their clients to instruct a lawyer early in the process whilst they're on the market, prepare all the replies and information up front, and that would enable us to do a far quicker and more thorough review at an early stage if we're acting for a buyer. I think sellers' reluctance to do that is based on the fact that if they don't have a certain buyer or an offer on the table, human nature says there's probably 10 other things they could be doing as sort of busy people.
Do you think also that when some people are going on the market, there's not a guarantee that they're definitely going to sell unless they get a certain price? So from their perspective, it's, well, I don't really want to do that unless I know I'm going to definitely get the price I want. Otherwise, I'm going to take it off in 6 months' time. So you've obviously got that side from the vendor's perspective as well, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think human nature says that they're not going to start filling forms in or answering questions until they really have to.
Yeah.
And that's something that if we could encourage them to do it sooner rather than later, and like I say, with the digitisation of things, people's documentation is far more likely to be held electronically nowadays than it was before, when they were having to sort of turf out drawers for building regulations, completion certificates and things like that. So I think it will, I certainly hope it will become easier over time to get that information ready in advance.
Yeah.
It would also be nice to see source of funds checks or verification of identity being done centrally, so that you don't have this multiple interaction with broker, lawyer, estate agent. It's very cumbersome when you think about it for a client to have to verify their ID with multiple people, prove their funds with multiple people. So I still think there's a lot of inefficiency that could be cleared up through probably incentives from the government or some sort of central body that can centralise that information, plus the sort of technology that's available nowadays.
If you've got some advice for we've spoken about them before, but first time buyers, they're probably the most common.
Yeah.
They've never done it before. They're going into it. What's some advice that you would give them to kind of give them sort of just like a step up and go, this is what you should be doing as early on in the process as possible, or this is something you definitely need to be doing when you're going out and viewing, or you're thinking about making an offer? What's the sort of the best piece of advice you would give to them?
I would say prepare in advance. So speaking to a mortgage broker early on is obviously a critical part of it.
Thank you, James.
But obviously understanding what you can afford today, and how your spending habits and things like that might affect your ability to buy. Quite often, first-time buyers are relying on money from elsewhere, whether that's bank of mum and dad or somewhere else. So having the information that relates to that verified early is also important. So engaging with the professionals, mortgage broker, I would say solicitor as well. If you can find a lawyer even before you've made an offer on a property, that can really help, because actually that lawyer may be prepared to talk to you about the different sort of idiosyncrasies of that particular property. You might have something that you might have two that you're second viewing, for example, and you want to know about one over the other. One might have cladding, the other one might have a short lease or something like that. So there's always the ability to go in armed with some information from professionals, whether that's informal or formal, ahead of sort of committing to a purchase.
And what would be the best way? So if I was a first-time buyer and I said, I need a solicitor, I need to go. Who should I just go on Google? Should I ask? Who's the best people to ask? Really, I mean, I suppose it's the agents at the end of the day, isn't it? Really?
The agents are a good point of first contact, and it's just finding people that you trust and that you get along with. Yeah. Because ultimately, it's the process can last several months, so you really want to work with people that you do get along with. A broker is a good first point of contact. Brokers often know surveyors. Surveyors are really important, I think, in the process as well. Yeah. Some will pick up the phone and actually tell you what they think on a call rather than just relying on a report. And certainly as a first-time buyer, reading a survey report, it can be pretty scary. But actually verbalizing it can really help to understand, this list of different issues that the report says may not mean don't buy it. It may mean just be aware of it. It might be something that you need to attend to over the next few months or years. So I think it's really just pulling a team in together of people that you feel like you can trust and get along with.
But on that same note, do you think there's also people that they lean on the advice of people that might have done this 20, 25 years ago? Yeah. And the advice then is very, very different to the advice now.
Yes.
I feel like sometimes the advice that they get and the people that they trust it's good to have that, but it's got to be the right people. It can't just be people that bought 20 years ago, where the systems are very, very different. The whole process is very, very different.
I think there's always a risk. As I said before, it's everybody has an opinion on property, and quite often it will be the mum and dad, or someone in the family who has an opinion where they haven't actually done it or been involved in the property market for many years. Mm. The other aspect is the press, because obviously the press is there to sell stories, and so rarely do you get a good news story in property that's saying you should buy now. So I think where you get your information is important, and obviously as a first-time buyer, particularly if you're getting money from your mum and dad, you're probably going to have to listen to them a little bit in terms of what's happening. But I think having trusted professionals who are working in it day in, day out, they're the people that you should really be talking to. I think people have a natural skepticism about estate agents, but estate agents are on the front line, and they are the best placed people to tell you what's going on, as are brokers, because you get to see the number of mortgage applications that are going through. So you really know, you're a good bellwether as to what's happening in the market. Mm. And so if you're trustworthy and they get along with you, like I say, that's a really good place to start. If it's then supported by a lawyer who works closely with those agents or brokers, then that's a pretty good place to start. Okay. I would say. Would
you say, because obviously we've spoken about first-time buyers, and that's probably the easiest market or the easiest scenario to talk about, not sort of knowing all the bits and pieces that you want to know about the law side. Mm. Is there much of a contrast between people buying investment properties to the buy-to-let side? Is it just a completely different world than someone buying a residential home for the first time, than someone buying a flat or a studio or whatever it might be as an investment property? Are they very different, or is it relatively similar?
There's obviously different reasons for wanting to buy it in the first place. So as a buyer of a place that you want to live in, you might be sensitive about certain aspects that you're not that fussed about as an investor. For example, as an investor, you want to know that you can that it's worth the money that you're paying for it, that it will get the yield that you want or expect to get, that you understand the management of it, because obviously that affects your yield if there's costs involved and so on, and ideally you don't want to have lots of active management of it. Perhaps development potential in future. So there's obviously different aspects there that you might be sensitive as a buyer that you wouldn't be as an investor, or vice versa. Yeah. So there is a key difference, and we've seen far less investment going on. Yields haven't been what they need to be. Obviously, the tax regime has really changed the appetite for buy-to-let in recent years, but we still have it, and people still do buy London property in particular, and actually the sort of global turmoil and events that we've seen recently are probably piquing people's interest a little bit more in London property as a safe haven, which historically it has been for many years. But certainly some nuances between buying for yourself or buying as an investor.
What would you say that investors who are buying for an investment perspective, are those cases that you're dealing with, are they typically easier? Do they happen a lot quicker in terms? Because from my perspective, I mean, we don't do a lot of buy-to-let investment purchases that much anymore. They're very few and far between because of the change in lots of legislations and all that kind of stuff. But typically, when I see an investment purchase, it does tend to happen a lot quicker than someone buying for the first time. And maybe that's because someone's in a chain, and the chain is six properties deep or whatever. Typically investments, it's someone's already got the cash, someone's just offloading something, and it's a very quicker transaction. But the actual sort of conveyancing side, do you find it just a lot quicker, or?
I guess because people are less sensitive about what the property is actually going to do for them. It's more about the number than anything, or the numbers than anything else. So, and you're typically dealing with people with a bit more experience.
Yeah.
So on the investment side, because it's less of an emotional purchase, it can go through quicker, whether that's with cash or with a mortgage, provided it stacks up from a mortgage lender's point of view. With the emotions involved in a purchase for someone's home, then clearly that can slow things down a bit. They're a bit more considered about what they're doing. But on the flip side, we find that investors are less committed emotionally, so more likely to withdraw if it doesn't all stack up for them. So I wouldn't know in terms of numbers what the sort of fall through rates are relative to each other, but yeah, I would definitely say that an investment purchase would tend to go through quicker than a non-investment purchase.
Fair enough. Have you ever had a situation where, maybe you have to be candid now, maybe not mention anyone's names, but have you ever had a situation where you just get frustrated with the client because there's situations where they bring things up that doesn't need to get, and you just literally want to grab them and go, look, just calm down, just chill, this is going to be okay, just try and take as much emotion out of it as you can. I can imagine that must pop up a bit from time to time, and you have to kind of sometimes just bite your tongue. But I mean, I know you've mentioned it before, but emotion's probably the biggest factor when dealing with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think there's you have to expect that people will get hot under the collar at times. They're stressed, and managing people under stress is a challenge and a skill in itself. Sometimes things are said which you have to make sure you don't take personally. And part of the point about leadership is really being able to manage people's emotions and being able to take charge without upsetting them, obviously. And that's really what people want. They want you to take control. I think sometimes as lawyers you can you could lose control where there's a lot of noise around. Agents will be saying one thing, brokers may be saying another, solicitors on the other side, and people obviously posture and make threats to withdraw from transactions, and quite often it will come down to completion dates later on down the line where people's expectations aren't being met. So I think as a lawyer we need to keep our emotions under check and sort of keep control of.
Does that frustrate
ourselves.
You? Does that frustrate you? If you as a lawyer, I can imagine you've put say something's dragged on for 6 months and it's literally coming down to an exchange date or a completion date, and the vendor or the buyer is saying, if it doesn't happen by this date, I'm going to pull out. Do you ever just get, for God's sake, can we just give it just another couple of weeks? Because the reality is, I mean, from my perspective, and I've had this conversation with buyers and friends of mine, and I said, look, the reality is, yes, you don't want it to fall out of bed. That's the worst thing that can happen, especially if you've been doing this for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But the reality is, if that vendor does decide to take the property off the market and find a new buyer, they've then got to start this whole process all over again. And it's like, do you really think they want to sit through this for another 5 to 6 months with a brand new buyer who doesn't know if they can even get the mortgage from the start point to then be 5 months down the line? Does that, I can imagine that from your perspective,
sort of,
I can imagine it's...
It frustrates me. I'd be lying if I said it didn't frustrate me from time to time. But actually, what I say to my team consistently is that it's part of the process. So emotions will run high. People will get desperate, and people will posture, and it's part of the job. So we would not be doing our job properly if we allowed it to overwhelm us and frustrate us all the time. So whilst it is sometimes a frustration, it is just part of it, and we have to accept that and be good at dealing with it, and that I can't see is going to change. So we just need to equip ourselves with the tools.
I can imagine that's when the phone call of calm down, take a step back, just...
Yeah, of course. And you're dealing with you're dealing with people, right? So everybody's different, and hopefully over that process, and part of becoming good at what we do is to get to know people properly and what really motivates them, and that will also sort of inform us as to how we can speak to them and how direct we can be. And sometimes it is the counselling approach, and sometimes it's the right, come and dust yourself off and get a grip here.
Yeah.
We're going to get through this. It might not be happening to your time scale, but these are the steps that we're going to do. And I think generally people will respond to a plan and to understand what you're going to do from this point onwards. And that's where it really helps having brokers, lawyers, and others involved in the process, agents, that you can speak to on a level and say, right, let's keep this deal together. These are the things that I think need to happen from this point on.
Where do you see the most common reason that deals fall apart? Is it the timing?
So there's a saying, obviously, in agency, that time kills deals. And there's an extent to which that's obviously true. But if communication and expectations are managed to the right level, then it's not necessarily the time. It's more about the communication through that period. So delays will happen. Sometimes those delays can't be avoided. Sometimes they can. I think there can be an issue sometimes where an avoidable delay happens and then everyone falls out with each other.
What type of avoidable delays could they be?
So to pick on one that I'm sure all the agents will jump on straight away is where source of funds checks are not completed until before exchange. And the reality is source of funds checks should be done right at the beginning of the process. But it's an ongoing requirement to sort of monitor that throughout. And quite often things are thrown in at the last minute. And so a last minute check before exchange reveals that part of the funding hasn't been completely verified or has changed. But, lawyers are still getting to grips with that. And like I say, we work very hard to make sure that process is complete early on. But there's no doubt that can cause delays at times. And of course, people get very frustrated by that, understandably. In terms of other causes of delay, again, it's sort of reviewing paperwork and realising that something's been missed or could have been raised earlier in the process. That is an inevitable source of frustration for people. But I think the really important thing to do at that point is to accept, okay, it's frustrating, but
let's try.
What are we going to do from this point onwards, and not to necessarily start pointing fingers at each other and getting very upset about it. So, like I say, I think whilst time does kill deals, and we all want to work hard to try and shorten that time frame, we get paid sooner and clients are happier. So everyone's motivated to do it, but it's really a question of just making sure that people don't fall out with each other and keep communicating openly.
If brokers and agents could interact with you differently or in a way to make it better, what would it be?
Good question. I mean, I'm old school, so I quite like just speaking to people on the phone. But I appreciate that there are pressures now that mean that phone time is it's a premium, and I struggle to get hold of lawyers on the other side. I struggle to get hold of agents and brokers sometimes on the phone. So I know there's a strong push towards sort of electronic communication, and people's email inboxes are full now too. So it's a sort of evolving challenge, but I still maintain that a phone call can really remove an awful lot of additional communication. Questions can get answered there and then. Now, whether there's some other form of sort of instant communication,
WhatsApp,
Slack, all that stuff, I'm not sure. I definitely think there's a space to drive shared communication with different parties. And I've mentioned that about ID checks and sort of being able to verify things that can then be used universally or throughout the relevant parties, because we are asking people to rekey an awful lot of information and share a lot of really sensitive information. So people's passport copies flying around, things like that. So I think there's an awful lot that can and probably will be done over the course of the next few years to address that.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same boat as you. I think I as I said, I came from the agency side first. Mine was predominantly client services. So my role for 10 years was you had to just pick up the phone. You couldn't do your job without picking up the phone, and you were almost targeted to hit phone calls per day. And if you didn't, it wasn't like you were told off or anything like that, but you would just say, come on, if you don't pick up the phone, someone else will, and they'll get more business than you. And I'm very much a believer of, I could get more done out of a 5-minute phone call than I could sending 6 or 7 different emails back and forth and someone missing something, so you have to then confirm it again. If you pick up the phone and just speak to someone, you can get everything out of the way very nice and early on in the process. It sets the stalls, and you kind of go, right, this is what the situation is with the buyer, this is what the situation is with the vendor, that's where they want to be, this is the timescales that we've done, and you've managed to get that done in 5 minutes. But I guess I think it's as you said before, everyone in today's day and age is so busy or running around, presumably busy anyway, and they just don't want to pick up the phone. They'd rather just text or WhatsApp or email, because they've got 1,000,001 other things that they think is going on. And the problem is that, especially from your side, is that if you look at an inbox on a day, if you just leave your email, I mean, I can imagine what your inbox would look like if you left it for a day, but I mean, it can sometimes, things just get missed and things get lost, and sometimes they accidentally go into junk folders or wherever it might go. And then it feels like it's even longer, and it's like, I sent you an email 2 days ago. Like, okay, well, just pick up the phone. I would have answered you if you left me a voicemail. And I guess that's what I get frustrated with about from clients as well. And yes, I'll hold my hands up. Sometimes I'm not always around to pick up the phone if there's other things going on, but I'll always endeavour to call someone back if it's really urgent. If it's really urgent, you just call me non-stop, and then I'll eventually pick up the phone call. Like, what's going on? But I think from my side, I completely agree with you on that. And I think that's what I almost feel like it needs to kind of get brought back in, because I've sat in some offices in agency, and I can sit there and I listen, and there's no one picking up the phone or calling. They're emailing out inquiries. They're emailing, I've just launched this new property. Come and see this. But it's just pick up the phone and call someone. Just pick up the phone.
I think there's inevitably in this day and age, there's a drive towards sort of commoditizing everything that happens. And if you could click a button and buy a property, then people would love to do that from their iPads or whatever. But that world doesn't exist yet. And we are in a position of advising our clients, and it's a pretty material thing that people are doing when they're buying a property. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of risk involved.
Yeah, massively.
And it's an important decision. So whilst I'm completely on board with providing technology and utilizing technology to help streamline the process and areas of it, and we're lawyer led, so it's the lawyer that speaks to the client at the beginning. They win their trust, and they're the ones that are going to deal with it. And that's a really important thing for us, because that relationship is then maintained throughout the process until the job is done. So we have a post-completion team who will manage the process after completion. And then with the land registry and so on. But at that point, the focus for the client is to move in, unpack their boxes and live their lives. I agree with you. I think maintaining phone communication is really important from the start all the way through. And there might be a generational thing where people expect things to be done more on the digital side, and I'm sure, like I say, finding the happy balance is really what we're after. But talking is important.
I think it's just a big point that I think people need to be more open to the idea of. because it just seems like everyone's just more comfortable. Oh no, don't call me, just send me a WhatsApp. And it's like
one of the things I remember as an agent, there's such a buzz when you put a deal together, and it's a really important moment for people who just had an offer accepted, and should be an exciting time. And then if you speak to those same people 3 months on, when they're still chomping at the bit to get into their property, some of the magic can get lost at that point. By that point, so we think it's important for the lawyers to get involved from the get-go, and try and keep that enthusiasm going. Don't sort of let all the magic evaporate through a complicated legal process. It may take a while. So it's important to properly understand what a client is feeling. You need to be able to hear the tone of their voice, and certainly that's something that's important to us.
What's the longest deal that you've ever been part of? Something that's taken. I'm not trying to say that it's because of you that it happened, but have you had something which has just dragged on and on?
Yeah, we've had a few with various challenges. I remember actually the longest as an agent was actually wasn't my deal, but I think it was over a year. God blimey. And that was due to a legal issue. Another similar one had an extraordinary chain, which involved 2 siblings selling a house full of cats. And
Of course it was.
And that was a very lengthy one. But the thing is, there are very few transactions that can't go through. It's just that some of the legal challenges will take time because you're dealing with different parties, whether it's a local authority, you might be dealing with a freeholder, multiple freeholders, or people involved in the management of the building itself. So it's just understanding how to go about pulling it together, and then obviously trying to keep the relative parties engaged. And I think if they can see some light at the end of the tunnel and they're prepared to wait, then fair enough. It should happen.
Yeah. Do you ever get the sense that once, say someone's made an offer, the offer's been accepted, case has landed on your desk or one of your team's desks?
Yeah.
Are there any, the term gets branded around quite a bit, but are there any red flags that immediately go off to kind of go, I'm not sure this is going to go through? Like early on in the process, is there anything that sort of stands out as a reason why then 2 months down the line it's like, well, that deal fell through? It's like, well, no real surprise there. Is there anything like that that's ever happened?
Yes. Yeah, there are plenty, actually. Often it will be to do with the profile of the client. So if there are red flags around, where their money's coming from, or whether their sort of ID stacks up, obviously if we want it, we undertake that process quickly. And in those instances, you want to fail fast and not waste too much time going forward with something that ultimately isn't going to happen because you can't continue working for the client. Sometimes with transactions, they'll be very complicated and involve, again, multiple parties and unknowns. Sometimes you're dealing with pieces of land that aren't registered or belong to the neighbour, and you quickly get a picture that this is going to be a complex process, and then obviously you have to engage with the client to explain that. And if they aren't prepared to wait, or they get that early heads up that things are going to be more complicated than expected, then obviously they can take a view on whether to crack on or to abandon. So there's a fair few of that, but again, that comes down to knowing your client and what, why they're buying or selling and what their motivations are. So you can explain to them early what's happening and what your view is, and that's partly why I say about first-time buyers engaging with a lawyer quickly. They can, even before they've found a property, and it's not just first-time buyers, any client. If they can talk to a lawyer about the property they're about to offer on and get a quick view, because there's plenty of information now available online or through the sales particulars and so on, they can make a decision as to whether to make an offer or not. And what kind of offer to negotiate, if there are, wrinkles, if you like.
Do you think that happens? Does that happen a lot with you and your team? But they actually call you before they've even made an offer?
Some do.
Stuff.
Yeah, some do, particularly existing clients.
Yeah.
I think they understand how we work. We are not a volume player. We do quite a lot of work in London and elsewhere, but we don't have sort of vast numbers of clients at any time. So we are able to give reasoned views on stuff ahead of time, and those that have used us understand that. So it's less common for new clients to come to us with those types of questions. Although I do encourage agents and introducers to make an early introduction, because I think it can really help. A lot of time is wasted, I think, actually, in pursuing transactions that aren't really going to go anywhere. And I think as a newish negotiator, I remember thinking any deal counted, and you sort of hope that it sticks.
Yeah.
But actually, time has taught me
PVA glue,
exactly,
and masking tape.
Time has taught me that it's a real waste of time to do that, and actually being really thorough about putting a deal together with a willing buyer who understands the challenges, and a willing seller whose expectations are managed properly, it is so much more valuable, because the chance of it going through are so much higher.
I mean, you mentioned before about, obviously there's things that can land on your desk, but when you first take a case on, about checking where the money's coming from, are there going to be any family members that are going to be involved in some way, shape or form? Is not some of that stuff should have already been done though before it even gets to you? I mean, from a money perspective, from the broker should know where the money's coming from, what country it's coming from, because obviously there's some certain countries that just obviously a bit more taboo at the moment than others. So surely some of those checks should have already been done before it even gets to you.
Yeah, that's true, but we can't rely on the fact that they have been, and that's the challenge. So we have to satisfy ourselves. The regulator's clear about that, and so whilst we would expect the checks to have been done by that professional, whether it's a broker and the agent as well, we can't rely on the fact that they have been. So we do our checks early on, and like I say, again, it comes back to the point of managing a client properly or a buyer properly means getting that information down quickly and setting their expectations as to what's going to be needed or what's going to be requested. And we're also conscious of the fact that buyers may not be entirely upfront with the agent.
No, really? So I'm stuck.
Because they want to get the deal agreed, and sometimes they feel it's going to help them to not be completely honest or upfront. Sorry, until it gets to the lawyer stage. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, I think we're nearly at the end now. So, is there anything about James Hollingsworth that the world needs to know, or that you would like, sort of, people that will listen to this? Is there anything about you or about Laurus in particular that you think is a sort of key selling point? Because I've referred clients across to your guys and your firm, and I think it's brilliant. And I've worked with you for a number of years. Yeah. But obviously not everyone listens to me. So is there anything that you obviously use this opportunity to talk about sort of Laurus really and yourself?
That's kind. I think it's less about me and more about the firm. We set up 9 years ago with a sort of vision to try and do things a bit differently in the legal space. We very deliberately position ourselves in property, family and legacy, which bluntly is death, divorce and moving house, in the context of doing the areas of the life events that are particularly stressful for people. And my sense was that lawyers, even those who were good at the technical legal side, weren't always able to communicate well with their clients, and that was as important. So we are we're learning all the time. We're trying to improve consistently and work with people like yourselves who we know understand the same principles and operate on the same principles. Our family team are now recognised in Chambers and Legal 500. They've always done really incredible work at a high level and high sort of profile, and it is very much about reputation in that space. So I'm pleased to see that they're really progressing and growing in that space through their approach, which is outcome focused. There is I think there's a sense that lawyers are sort of money hungry and just are out to get paid, particularly in those areas, because they can take advantage of that position. And our guys are absolutely about managing clients through really difficult, stressful periods in their life, and that's why they do the job. So on the property side, we've got a growing team. We're doing more on the commercial side as well. And we're pushing out of London into the home counties. So, and then private client, again, people often put off, we talk about sellers not preparing in advance for their sales because they don't feel the urgency. Well, lots and lots of people don't prepare in advance for their own death. And people don't like to talk about it. They feel invincible until the time comes, and there can be shocks around the corner. So we're trying to sort of lower the barrier and really be far more approachable so that people will get their affairs in order, get their wills and LPAs done and that type of thing. So rather than anything special about me, it's really about trying to introduce as many of my team members across those three areas. And I think I would hope that people will feel the difference and see the difference when they interact with them and be encouraged to use this for those things.
Great. Perfect.